this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today I thought I would do another installment in the series that I've been doing on and off about movies that have something to say about metaphysics. And as you recall, some time ago, I was asked what my favorite metaphysical movies were that actually portrayed magic and metaphysics in a realistic way, or which were of interest to the metaphysical community. And today I thought I would bring you another selection, somewhat different than the others I've added, and yet not that different either. And today I wanted to talk about a movie from the 1930s called The Ghoul. And The Ghoul obviously is a horror movie. I'm personally very fond of horror movies, and one reason is that almost any movie that deals with metaphysics is likely to end up in the horror genre. You rarely see it outside, and even movies that aren't strictly speaking dealing with what you might call horror, if they deal with metaphysics, are going to be put under that label anyway. So most of the films I'm going to talk about during this series will probably come under that heading, even though they don't always really belong there. But personally, I'm very nostalgic for the horror genre for a lot of reasons, including the Friday night horror films that used to play in my youth, most of which came out of the 30s and 40s. And 1930s horror is somewhat different than contemporary horror films, in that it tends to be a little more cerebral, in my opinion, and definitely less gory. Very often I think the plots go much deeper in terms of actual metaphysics or even perceived metaphysics, though of course it depends on what the movie is. Now, previously I've talked about the 1932 Mummy, and I've talked about The Others with Nicole Kidman, a much more recent film. The Ghoul comes from the early 30s and stars Boris Karloff, and it also has some other very talented people, including Ralph Richardson and Cedric Hardwicke. It's not what I'd call a great film, but if you like the genre and you like the era, it is a very interesting film. It's very atmospheric, it's very evocative, both of the Gothic genre in general and of the 1930s in particular. And the story is entertaining. It has nothing whatsoever to do with actual metaphysics. So why am I including it in this discussion? Well, it has a lot to do with paganism, and contemporary and modern paganism in particular. It's set in the 1930s when it was filmed, and it has the distinction of at least three major characters being practicing pagans. The main character, Professor Morlant, played by Boris Karloff, and two other characters who are portrayed as being native Egyptian. All three of these characters are portrayed as practicing ancient Egyptian religion, presumably in the form of Egyptian revivalism. Although exactly what is intended is not entirely made clear, but one would assume Egyptian revivalism, which was a big thing at the time. In addition, the main hero and heroine of the film are rather ambiguous in terms of their religion, and may or may not be Christian or Egyptian revivalist. It's never addressed. However, the thing that's important about this, in my opinion, is one, it does show how prominent pagan revivalism was at the time, and you know, a lot of people today think that the pagan revivals began in the 1960s or even the 1950s. That is not true. It's a much older movement than that. Individual traditions, individual branches may be newer, but the pagan revival goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, with a major push every generation or so. And in the early part of the 20th century, there was a lot of pagan revival going on, and Egyptian revivalism was a fairly strong one. And in this film, again, the main character is portrayed as an Egyptian revivalist. And although there are a few characters presented to object to this, including a Christian pastor and a superstitious servant, for the most part, the other characters, regardless of what their religion is portrayed to be, do not particularly react to this as if it's an odd or a bad thing. They completely take it in stride. They actually show less shock or surprise than you would expect from contemporary characters. And although there are scenes such as the funeral scene for the main character, which is portrayed as kind of an Egyptiana funeral, not really an authentic ancient Egyptian funeral, but having many of the themes that you might expect, the mourners are portrayed as muttering about it after the fact, but they take part in it completely politely without making any kinds of objections or anybody leaving, which is more than you might expect from an actual pagan funeral today if the people attending were not also pagan. Most of the characters react to the main character's paganism as being eccentric, but not particularly objectionable, except for the two I mentioned. And I think this is very important for people to be aware of and to see that this is not a new thing, and that even the idea of acceptance of paganism isn't entirely a new thing in our supposedly Christian society. If you go back and look at this film, a number of other films, a number of books published in the era, you'll see that there was really a lot going on. Now, in this film, it follows the older Gothic formula that all the metaphysical elements are explained away at the end. And I should say we're going into spoiler territory at this point if you actually want to see the film. And the beliefs of the main character as an Egyptian revivalist are not shown as being substantiated as they are in The Mummy, but they're also not really called into question either. He is portrayed as being accidentally buried alive and believing himself to have come back from the dead, not actually doing so. However, that does not change the reactions of other characters or their feelings toward his religious beliefs. And as a statement of religious tolerance, it's actually quite a remarkable film, particularly considering the era. But my point is that the era isn't really what people seem to want to remember it as. There was a lot of pagan revivalism going on. It was more accepted than people remember it being, and not nearly as marginalized as you might think. And this film makes that very clear. So these would be some of the reasons I include The Ghoul in my list of films that I recommend to the contemporary metaphysical community. And I think if you watch it, you will see the things that I'm talking about, and in many cases they'll be a bit of a revelation to you. So those would be my thoughts on the matter. I hope you find them interesting, and until next time, may you blessed be. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from witchghoul.com. Are you looking for the best in pagan and magical education? With more than 12,000 pages, witchghoul.com is like having your own personal library with individual learning assistants to help you study. And Witchghoul's Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere education system is available any place on Earth, anywhere you are and anytime you want it, as long as you have an internet connection. Witchghoul's lifetime memberships are a great value. They really do last a lifetime. They've been there for years and they'll be there for years to come. So get your membership today at witchghoul.com.